Right, have you got it's 8 o'clock. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this month's Adventurous Inc. conversation. My name's Tim Frenham. I am the founder and curator of Adventurous Inc. I'm sure most of you know that, but just in case you're new, hello. Nice to see you. So nice to see loads of people. Hello, Dan. Hello, Adam. Hello, Brian. Hello, Keith. Hello, Martin. Hello, Tracy. Hello, Bob. Victoria, Charlotte, James. Gosh, everyone's here. Right, brilliant. So sorry about last month, by the way. Sorry we didn't get to do 50 words for snow. It's been snowing here today, of all things. Crazy. Last week, I was sunning myself on Scarborough Beach for my birthday, and this week, it's been snowing. Would you believe it? So yeah, this month, we're talking life lessons from the Amazon with Pip Stewart. I'm going to bring Pip in. Let's pin Pip. Hello, Pip.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So I have to do an intro. So Pip is an adventurer, journalist and presenter, a hippie at heart with a love for travel, meditation, health and well-being. She's a firm believer that connecting people with the great outdoors is good for the soul. She's produced political and travel multimedia stories for the Telegraph, BBC, CNN, South China Morning Post, and is Red Bull's adventure editor. And I love this bit on her bio where she says, I eat bugs and tell stories, not necessarily in that order. How cool. Pip, welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me, Tim. I was thrilled when you chose the book for your monthly club. So thank you.
Well, I was thrilled to feature it as well. I mean, this is the joy of doing what I do. I get to choose books that I really love and share them with other people, and I think they'll like them. So I'm sure folk will like this one. So Pip, where are you joining us from?
So I live down on the south coast in a place called East Wittering, just off the Isle of Wight, basically opposite the Isle of Wight, near Chichester.
Fab. And have you always lived around there?
No, so it's funny that we're talking about this because I truly believe travel and journeys have the power to change your life. And before here, I was in London, and that was when I did the expedition, got back from Guyana and thought, no, I need a radical life shift here. So left London and then moved to the sea to find a community more rooted in nature off the back of the journey that I mentioned in the book.
Well, they do say all journeys are a transformation, and I think that's especially so when you spend 3 months trekking through the Amazon, which we'll come to. I should say, folk, you probably know the way it works, but if you've got your own questions, feel free to chip in as we go along. So we're going to talk. Obviously, we're going to talk about the book and writing the book and the whole thing of writing, because I think Pip brings quite an interesting perspective with her journalist hat on as well as her author, and is a poet as well. So we'll be talking a bit about poetry. And then we'll be talking about her adventure and flesh-eating parasites and what it's like to do all that and then try and make sense of it in a book. And we'll do all that within an hour. So you can field your questions via the chat. You can do that anytime. If something crops up as we're going through, feel free to throw it into the chat. That's where questions happen. So let's go right back to early Pip, very early Pip, little Pip. What's your first memory of the outdoors then, Pip?
Do you know what? It was my dad was in the forces, so I traveled a lot, and I always remember going down the bottom of my garden and just singing and just feeling super happy, just being outside, being in nature. What I didn't realize is that our garden backed onto a golf course. So to anyone playing golf would have heard this horrendous singing coming from, 6 or 7 year old me, just like, happily gallivanting in the outdoors. But yeah, I think I've always just loved being outside. And my parents massively kind of fostered that. As I said, my dad was in the RAF, and I quite regularly remember my mum, when my dad was away on trips and things, would just bundle my sister and I into a car and think nothing of driving across Europe to take us back to the UK for a bit. And so I think I kind of grew up in an environment where, we liked being outdoors, and I had a really strong female role model in my mum as well.
Cool. And you mentioned something in the book about being a military child and having to move around, and how that sort of shaped your personality and made you almost put on an outgoing front. Did eventually that front that you were putting on, did that become you? Was that you as a child and a teenager, or was it always a bit of a front, and was the real Pip lurking behind it then?
Do you know what? I love that, Tim. No bullshit. Let's just get to the core. Like,
look, we've got a lot to get through. We've got a lot to get through. I've done my introductions. We found out where you are. We found out about little Pip. You mentioned your dad was in the army. I had to go there. I'm sorry.
No.
We'll tone it back a bit.
Absolutely. And I think anyone who's moved a lot as a kid, well, actually anybody really, is that kind of feeling of not really fitting somewhere. And it's a horrible feeling when you feel like the outsider in some way, and you're constantly trying to break in and make friends. And yeah, I definitely, I wrote in the book that I think quite often, and probably the same with any people pleaser, right? You try and chameleon to fit in an environment, and that can be quite wearing on the soul, because sometimes it's like, well, who are you underneath all of that? So the short answer, Tim, is I think I'm still trying to work that out, but I'm getting more solid in who I am. And funnily enough, since becoming a mum, I think that sort of grounded me quite a lot more. So yeah, I think it's an ongoing process, isn't it?
Life, I guess, is an ongoing process, isn't it? So are you sharing that love of the outdoors with your little one now? Is that something that's important for you being a mum?
Oh my God, absolutely. And it's incredible watching Willow. So she's 2, and you just watch her. As I say, we live on the beach, and she'll go out and just stare at a rock for about 20 minutes. And initially you kind of give it a cursory glance and go, okay, it's a rock. But actually, when you get down there with her, you're like, wow, there are actually so many different colors and the shapes and the textures. And it's funny. I don't know. Have you ever seen David Attenborough be interviewed by Barack Obama?
No, I don't think I have.
Oh, if anyone's watching, do Google that interview, because it is really powerful. Because yeah, to see that the roles flipped in that Obama is interviewing Attenborough, but he asks him, when did your love of the great outdoors and nature start? And Attenborough turns the question round and says, well, when did everyone else's stop? He was like, watch a child, it's there, it's innate, it's in all of us. And it's a really powerful interview, and I would recommend watching it. But yeah, I think you watch any small person, given half a chance, they are natural explorers. They'll pick up stuff, they'll look under the rocks and find the worms and the wiggly things. And it's almost, as we age, that's when we're learning fear, we're learning those boundaries, and kids just don't have that.
Yeah. So do you think, again, we're going deep straight away here, but do you think sort of living adventurously is a way to retain some of that childlike wonder at the natural world?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. I mean, when you're suddenly thinking about mortgages and bills and who's cooking what for supper, and you're like, actually, like, a lot of life is quite mundane. And I think it is trying to find, and it sounds trite, but I genuinely believe it's trying to find wonder in the little things, whether, if you can see the underside of a leaf in a different way, or if you can just, marvel at the beauty of a butterfly when it lands on a flower. I think it's those tiny moments, the small things in life that are kind of constantly around us, that actually, the more you can tune into those, the more content I've definitely felt in my life. Because I've, I say this as having done some like grand adventures, thinking, once I've done this, I'll feel differently. But actually, it's not. It's the day to day.
I do think that there's probably something about you as a writer and a poet and a creative that also helps with that. I've always thought that about our authors, is the combining the adventurous and the natural world immersion with that creative process is really quite powerful. I feel. And has being outdoors helped with your creative process? Is it something that you need?
Definitely, but I would say actually in terms of creativity as well, it's just about being blooming nosy. I think it's like, if you ask a question of anything, where did your cup came from? Who made it? How did it get to your hand? Like, what's in it? Where did that come from? And I think it's that kind of constant curiosity, that asking why. And then I think layer on top of that, I think nature just has um, just this absolute miraculous quality to it, because there's a lot of like unanswered questions there, and it is just so beautiful. And yeah, I think it's a combination of being nosy and just enjoying being outside. And I think, I'm likely, given that your Adventurous Inc. book club, I think anyone who likes doing adventurous things probably finds some sort of solace in the outdoors, or there's something that it gives us that we don't necessarily get sat behind a desk doing a 9 to 5.
Mm. So I was gonna ask about that. You've done a perfect segue for me there. Thank you, Pip. Because I guess was there a time when you weren't as immersed in adventure in the natural world, and how did it come about that you came to make this your living, your profession, as well as your passion?
Completely by accident, to be honest, Tim. So I left university and I didn't know what else to do. So basically I looked at all the grad schemes, because I thought that sounds like a traditional career path. See what's out there. Joined Innocent Drinks in sales. And basically I left before I was sacked, because I was selling drinks into schools and people were saying to me, that smoothie's too expensive. And I'd be like, yes, it is. So yeah, I didn't do particularly well in that job, shall we say. And I realized, one thing I did really enjoy doing was traveling. And I was thinking, okay, so how can I spin this to my parents? Because they're not going to be best pleased. I've just quit this job in a really good company with no kind of, future prospects or whatever. But I ended up applying for a master's in Hong Kong. And then basically from there, I worked as a television presenter. And then my partner got a job in Malaysia. So we moved to Malaysia. And I think that was probably the start of a shifting career, in a sense, because he suggested that we cycle back from Malaysia to London. And it was the first time I could use my skills as a journalist, and I say a journalist in a very loose sense of a word. I mean, as a nosy person, as someone who's like especially nosy and likes asking questions. I realized that actually those human-powered journeys, I was meeting people and finding myself in places that are very much underreported, and stories that weren't necessarily given enough airtime in media. And I really enjoyed that way of storytelling. And I think, the flip side of that was I got back to London, a year later, having cycled halfway around the world, and reality hit again, because I was back in London thinking, oh my goodness, I don't have a job. I've got no way of like paying rent, like what on earth. So at the age of 30 something, I moved back in with my parents in Cheltenham, which was not fun, while I tried to figure out my life. And that was when a job came up at Red Bull, and I ended up working at Red Bull for a couple of years. And again, you ask about the kind of desk job thing, and it was amazing working there, but equally I'm reading about other people's adventures, and there was just this kind of thought in the back of my head that actually maybe I could try and make that form of storytelling that I really enjoy more of a career if I sort of took the leap and did my own thing and went freelance. So it was over the process of a couple of years, because I'm not one of those people to say, yeah, quit your job and just pack it all in. I like to have a bit of a loose plan, shall we say, so you're not going to get into financial difficulty. And then when I felt like I was at the stage where I could make it on my own, I sort of left and did that.
And never look back?
No, and it's interesting because during that shift, I've definitely gone from being more of a traditional journalist to more of I'm going to use the word influencer in terms of social media, and I really hate that word. But actually, the way I see social media is it's just a different form of connection. When I was doing traditional journalism, I'd be writing a story, I'd publish it, and you don't ever get any feedback, or maybe on the comment section somewhere. But the nice thing about social media is it is social. You can have that dialogue, you can have a two-way conversation. And actually, I found that a lot more interesting as someone who does like hearing from people. So I've been very uncomfortable with that as a job description. But equally, I'm sort of trying to embrace it a little bit more.
Well, you do a great job. I'm just going to post in the chat that people are welcome to ask questions. I know the pair of us are rabbiting away here. It's probably quite difficult for people to get in between, but the option is always there. So this is everyone's conversation as well as ours. So do you think Laura had that sort of a role for you in mind when she invited you to be part of the expedition? Was that your job? Were you there to document it? How did it work?
For those of you that heard the book, Lingham was she was the lady who came up with the whole concept. And yeah, I think it was the fact that I do document things, but I also think it was a case of a good personality fit, based solely on the fact that at Campfire, which is an adventure festival, I'd offered to change her baby's dirty nappy. So I think she was like, okay, so this is a woman I could probably spend 3 months in the jungle with. And then, you know, hopefully my journalistic kind of skills might have come in handy as well. But that was a fascinating thing about this, Tim. If you're spending time with people that you don't know particularly well, you've got to get a sense that actually this could go well. And, you know, I came in very much as a third wheel. So it was myself, a woman called Ness Knight, and then Laura Bingham. And Laura and Ness are best mates. Ness is godmother to one of Laura's children. And so I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose here. Best case scenario, you know, I come away with 2 good friends. Worst case scenario, they don't like me, I don't like them, see you later. But actually, you know, I say that quite flippantly. It went a little bit deeper in the sense of, I mentioned right at the beginning, I'm a people pleaser. And I realized that, you know, when you are in an environment where if you don't speak up, it can be life or death, I needed to kind of learn how to voice opinions. So we went to go and see a guy called Sandy, who essentially is a psychotherapist or a psychologist or one of those, I don't quite know the technical term, but he did an exercise with us about goal setting, looking at our personalities, looking at how we might mesh, and also looking at sort of flashpoints within the relationship. And that was really interesting for me because the key takeaway was basically Ness and Laura are very vocal. They kind of express themselves very clearly. And one of the things that I needed to work on was speaking up when I disagreed with people. So that was a real key learning, a life lesson, if you will, for me, because it was deeply uncomfortable to do so, but it was something that was very much needed.
And so great to lean into it, I guess, and do it in an informed fashion, as opposed to sort of finding yourself a month into the Amazon rainforest and then working out that you hadn't worked these things through.
Well, Tim, it didn't go so well because apparently, according to Laura, I was staring at her passive aggressively, which I think I actually was. So, you know, Laura wanted to get home to see her little baby who was 8 months old. And you can totally understand that being a mother now. And I think the initial goal of the expedition had been to do, you know, a world first. We're not going to do the world's quickest journey. It was like, just take our time, see some wildlife, embrace the culture. And yet suddenly the expedition goal had changed. It was Laura was desperate to get home to her baby, which you can understand. So I was in this weird position where I'm like, I'm going too fast for my ability here. I can't keep up. I am absolutely knackered, wanting to support my friend, but equally constantly feeling like the weakest link and constantly feeling like actually the goal of the expedition has changed and I'm not fully on board with this. So instead of saying that to her in a rational manner, I think what I ended up doing was just giving her stink eye and being massively passive aggressive. And so we had a little bust up on the trip, and it was really beneficial because Laura said, look, I feel like you're doing this. And I'm like, well, I feel like you're doing that. And lo and behold, I realized you can have an adult conversation, Tim, and still be really good friends afterwards. So with the best will in the world, it didn't go quite according to plan, but tried to have an adult conversation about it.
Speaking of being a mother, Charlotte's just asked whether your mother influenced your attitude to adventure.
In some ways, Charlotte, she did. I think her she's a very strong woman, my mum. And I think the fact that she could look after, the two, my sister and myself, and just take us off, and I think that definitely influenced her or me. The interesting thing about mum though is that she's really been very worried about my adventures, and she'd have sleepless nights, and I knew that whenever I would go away, it would put so much pressure and stress on mum. It was almost like, is this really selfish to do? Is this a really selfish thing to do? Yes, is a short answer. I think it is. But yeah, so it's an interesting one. She's both been an inspiration, but she's also been kind of that voice in my head going, should I be doing this?
But I guess that's life, isn't it? Nothing is as straightforward as being a simple inspiration. It's all more complex than that. And I think one of the things I loved about the book is how raw and open you were about all of the emotional upheaval that you were experiencing, and that must have taken quite a bit to put that vulnerable side of yourself in the book. Were you conscious of that, or was that something that you just thought, well, this is how I tell my story, with vulnerability and warts and all, and owning up to the things
Yeah.
that you wish you'd not done?
No, I think it's really important to kind of give an honest view of it, because actually, if you look at adventures of old, you kind of, I don't know, I looked at them thinking very chest beaty, very brave people, and I'm just not like that. And I think actually a myth in the adventure space generally is that you have to be like massively fit and you have to be massively brave, and actually I think it's just a case of the people who I've met who have done incredible things are just quite gritty and willing to learn, and basically your average person who's just decided to do something. And I think it's really important to share that. And there's a great philosopher, I don't know if any of you have read him, but a guy called Alan de Botton, and he was saying that the best indicator of how other people are feeling is how you're feeling. And I think, we can look at our neighbors, our friends, and think, oh, they've got the best life, they've got the best relationships, they never argue with their partner, that, everything's hunky dory. And actually, I think that the worries that you have and the fears that you have are very often, what everyone else is experiencing. So actually, it was really important to me. It was deeply uncomfortable to be like, actually, I'm not as confident as like I like to come across, or I'm not quite as I would like to portray myself. But I equally think it's really important.
Mm. And do you think that carries through into your role as a self-confessed influencer there? Is it important to be vulnerable there as well?
Oh, definitely. I think, well, social media has such a power. I mean, there's a limit, and I think it's up to everybody. I'm not going to necessarily share my innermost arguments or whatever it is, because I think there is a line, and everyone needs to work out what that is. But equally, when you follow people who do share a lot, it's quite liberating. So, yeah, I think there's an issue around privacy there, like how much you want to share. But I felt like with this book, I wanted to give a warts and all account of, this is how the adventure was, this is what I got wrong, this is what I do again, better. And just because we're all works in progress, aren't we? None of us are like these perfect human beings, and we get stuff wrong, and trying to give us a bit of compassion to ourselves is very hard, but I think it's something we all need to do, really.
Mm. The thing that really struck me about that was when you were sharing pictures on social media, and you got quite a harsh comment back about the way it would be perceived, and that must have been, you were in a difficult environment. You're just being your enthusiastic self and going, look, this is it, but then you had to internalize all of that, and it all comes out in the book. And I think that's absolutely fabulous. And you really you read the book differently as a result of that, or I read the book differently as a result of that, because I could see all of the thought process, and appreciate how difficult that could be for you, but then how you'd taken it and turned what was it must have been a difficult thing to hear because that's obviously not what you wanted, but then you turn that into a positive and were able to make something of it, which I thought was really powerful.
Thank you, because that, yeah. So, if you've read that bit of the book or not, but basically, so we received a lot of positive messages about the trip, but one message that stood out, and I can remember practically word for word, was from someone I really admire. I didn't know them, but I respect their work a lot. And this person said to me, you know, what you're doing is remarkable, not least because the optics of the trip are at best neo-colonial and at worst racist. And that was a real kind of slap in the face moment for me, because, you know, I claim that so much of my work is about fostering connection and understanding. And yet here I was, I'd unintentionally, by posting selfie after selfie after selfie, presented an image of the trip that was very different to the journey we were actually having. And now, behind the scenes, you know, every night I'd sit down with them, our group, you know, we were guided by the YY community, and I'd say, you know, to every single member of the team, what were your highlights? What were your best bits? Talk to me about the day. And they're the conversations that inform the book. But on social media, it was essentially narcissism. It was my face. It was like, hey, look at me, I'm doing this, and look at me in my kayak. And it was a really dark path, because I think when you do adventures for money, and you know, we had to get sponsorship for this trip, there is an element of sponsors will want you know, certain images, and you know that a selfie gets more likes. But it's a conversation I wanted to have, because the unintended consequence of that is it was neo-colonial, it was racist. I was deeply embarrassed and ashamed. My initial reaction wasn't helpful. You know, I got deeply upset. Again, an example of white fragility. And I sort of, I did a lot of soul searching after that, to be honest, Tim. It was sort of understanding that, yes, I was perpetuating a system that sidelined a community, because essentially when you travel to a place, how that country is seen and how the people in the country are seen is kind of formed by the images that are coming out, and not kind of sharing images of people other than myself wasn't helpful. So yes, it's an uncomfortable place to be, to admit that that was wrong and racist and neo-colonial, but it was something I want to share, because I think travel is inherently problematic. You know, where are we spending our money? Who has the privilege to travel? Do people want us in a country in the first place? And you know, with this trip, for example, we did have to get permission from the YY, the Ministry of Culture. So we did everything kind of by the book. But it's just very interesting how you can make mistakes as someone who is privileged, and not even realize that privilege, and be very unintentionally racist. So yeah, it was definitely something I wanted to address.
And I think the book was all the better for it. It's an interesting topic, and I think so many of our authors are recognizing that privilege now, and doing it in lots of different ways. But the way that you did it really stood out, actually. So I thought it was commendable, and made the book a better book as a result of it. And it led me to think. So I think it's really interesting the way you've structured the book as life lessons. Were you always thinking about doing a book, and were you always thinking about doing a book structured as life lessons? How did the two bits come, the book and then the lessons?
I'd be really interested to know if any of your audience are keen to write a book at any point, because it's a hell of a thing. So when I'd got back from our bike trip, I'd basically touted my book. You know, I'd kept a really big diary, and I was like, I'm going to sell the story of this bike trip. Went to some publishers, and they all sort of turned around and said, you're not famous, you know, these sorts of trips have been done before, you know, whatever, not interested. So with this particular journey, you know, I knew it was a world first. I knew that the fact that 3 women were doing the entire journey from source to sea could be quite an interesting angle. And I definitely went into the jungle with the intention of writing a book. And, you know, each night I'd sit in my hammock, because we go to bed about 7 o'clock. So there's not much to do once you're in bed. So I'd write for about an hour and a half, sort of writing up everyone's recollections of the day, with the view at some point trying to shape that into a book. Came back to the UK, spoke to some publishers, and that the feedback I got was that travel is pretty dead, you know, in terms of selling books. So I was like, oh, okay, back to the drawing board. Self-help, philosophy, that seems to be a growing genre. So I was like, how can I merge the two? And also just from my own interests, you know, I know that when people ask you, how was your holiday or your trip or whatever it is, they don't actually care. But if I could share something that could affect your life, people might care a little bit more. So it was very much trying to write with an audience in mind. I was inspired by a book called The Poetry Pharmacy. I don't know if you've ever come across that. If anyone is into poetry or just, you know, just interested in structures of books, it's a fascinating one because essentially it's a pharmacy for emotional ailments. So if you're feeling anxious or if you're feeling bereaved, or there's a whole range of like human emotions that come up, and there'll be a poem to kind of help heal or sit with you in that pain or that happiness or whatever it is. And it's a beautiful book, and I just really like that kind of structure, and I thought, okay, maybe I could try and merge the two.
And I think it worked beautifully. I'll come back to the lessons in a minute, but you've mentioned the poetry. So who inspires you as a poet then? Where are your poetic touchstones? And then what?
Do you know what, my absolute favorite is Philip Larkin. I love the fact that he is so dark. there's so much joy to be found in the darkness, I think. And I really like the way he brings to life, you know, Ambulances is a really interesting poem. He talks about these closed confessionals going through the streets, and that whenever we hear them, we're sort of reminded of our own mortality. And I thought that, you know, it's just changed the way I see ambulances. Or, you know, he talks about spring in terms of trees as their greenness is a kind of grief. And I'm like, whoa, that's messed up, man. Like, spring is meant to be this season of like joy, but the grief knowing that they're not going to stay green, and there's that change. I just find it quite, I don't know, it sits with something within me that goes, actually, you know, life is a bit of a tragedy, so let's enjoy it.
Wow. I mean, and that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, about those different eyes that writers and particularly poets look at the world, and how they relate it back to people. I think it's fascinating. I love the idea of the poetry pharmacy.
Oh, it's one of my favorite. They've got 2 books out now, and I always give them as presents for people. So if you ever stuck for a prezi.
Brill, fab. That's amazing. Thank you. But yeah, brilliant. So oh, hang on, we've got some good questions. So Karen has got a social history book in her, and it's wonderful and killing her.
I hear you, Karen.
Brilliant. And Adam's writing one now. Sorry, I'm reading the comments. Victoria's made a long comment. We'll come back to that. We will ask that question in a minute, Victoria, because we're going to dive into the trip. I just wanted to carry on with the on the lessons just for a minute. So you were back in the UK, you were recasting it and trying to think, well, how can we turn this into lessons? But it's tricky, isn't it? As a communicator, how do you straddle that fine line between kind of wanting to share your insight and then not being preachy about it? It's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I guess it's for the audience to judge whether I got that right or not, but I think it's basically about like what do I actually believe, and if you were to have a conversation with me, are these things that I'd actually say? If yes, and I come across as preachy, then, you know, that's just me trying to get used to like just, you know, embracing myself. And ultimately, I think everyone's got something of use to say, and some stuff's going to stick with people, some stuff's not, and yeah, it's just try things out, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's the best way to learn. I mean, that's why I started out in business, was I thought, well, that looks interesting, I'm going to give it a go. And 6 years later, I'm almost making a fist of it now.
But Tim, if you'd have second guessed yourself, and if you'd have constantly gone, oh gosh, I'm not sure about this, should I do it, should I not, the only way to kind of try something is just to get stuck in, isn't it, and see how it goes.
It is. Yeah, and learning by doing, I think, is the best way of learning. So so was there a favorite lesson that you went, oh, I really captured this, and for me this was the essence of what I learned on the trip? Or is that too big an ask?
That's a really interesting question. I think it's so ironic, isn't it? Because actually what I learned on this trip, I didn't need to do the trip. It's like, life is, I right at the end, that life is beautiful and life is fragile, so embrace it. And I think if I could sum up my entire philosophy of this trip, it's that, I very nearly kind of lost my life on a few occasions, and it was the little things that drew my attention. It was the undersides of the leaf, it was the ants, it was just the beauty of being on a river. And ironically, we have that right where we are right now. And yes, maybe I didn't need to do this big gigantic expedition to realize that, but equally it did sort of put something to rest inside me.
Did it put something to rest then? Is that it? Are you done with your big trips, or do you think you could be tempted back out there?
Well, if I'm being brutally honest, Tim, I think what this trip did was bring me face to face with my own ego, and it's uncomfortable. I think a lot of what I was doing is to be able to say, I'm the person who's cycled halfway around the world. I'm the person who's done a world first. Why can't I just be the person that likes pottering around and drinking cups of tea? Because I love doing that. That's also me. And I don't know. I think maybe I'm more quietly confident now that actually I don't need to constantly prove myself. And I think that trip kind of really highlighted that everyone's got their comfort zones. This journey was definitely way out of mine. I wouldn't do something like this again, especially not now being a mum. Does that mean I don't want to live an adventurous life anymore? Absolutely not, but I think adventure in a way that appeals more to me now, which is like family-based adventures and, getting a motorhome and going off to Norway and doing that kind of thing. I don't necessarily need to be wrestling caimans and taking photos with piranhas and all of this stuff, proper chest beating. So yeah, I think it was a big ego check. And I think a lot of people in this space, if they're really honest with themselves, are probably a little bit insecure.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Because when you were talking about ego there, I was going to talk about whether you think men and women have a different experience of adventure, maybe even different motives. So do you think that men and women have different motives and experiences?
No, I don't. Again, this is just my own personal thoughts, so kind of off the record, but I think everyone is either running from something or to something in the adventure space. If you're doing like hardcore, gnarly, extreme adventures, I think, and I think a lot of that will come down to insecurities, which a lot of people probably don't want to show. Like, why do you need to be the best at something? Why? And actually, I think, funnily enough, coming back, I think the most content people I know are the people who don't shout about it and don't have to go and do these grand speaking tours or write books and just quietly get on with life. They're the real heroes, I think. So, no, I think what's interesting about male and female, yeah, I don't know. I think it's good to have role models and a diverse range of role models, but I think actually the feelings that we feel deep inside are exactly the same. And I remember a conversation I had with Nigel, who was our 16-year-old guide, who was the youngest. And we were climbing up this blooming 45-degree slope. We were both like absolutely knackered. And we had this conversation about how much he missed his mum. And it was just so sweet. He was like this big, tough, like, look at me, I'm a 16-year-old, like in the jungle. And then, he's just like, I miss my mum. It was like, oh, so do I, Nigel. So yeah, I think the human experience is the same. But I can only say that from a female perspective, but I'd imagine it's the same.
Mm. Well, that's lovely. That's really nice, because it is quite easy to fall into that trap of going, well, the blokes are all about conquest and the women are all about nurture, and I think what we learn from our books is that it's so much more complicated than that, and you've got everyone is on a spectrum, male, female, and I guess it's the same whether you're from a Western nation or a less developed nation, whether you work a 9 to 5 or you're an indigenous person living a sort of more traditional lifestyle. We've all got the same chemicals coursing through us.
Mm. What I found fascinating though, Tim, which was really unexpected, was I thought I'm going to go to this environment, I'm going to prove myself, and I'm going to do exactly what everyone else is doing. And it was the first time that my physical limitations, I'm 5'4" and not, I'm strong, but I'm not necessarily the strongest. And it was really bizarre that I was gravitating towards the roles that were traditionally seen as more female. I was doing the washing up, or I wasn't necessarily chopping the wood for the fire. But again, I say this because Ness, who is one of the strongest people I've ever met, regardless of gender, she was getting stuck in as well. But it was just interesting that it was the environment for me, the first time where I've actually felt my gender being what making me want to act in a more kind of gender stereotyped way. And I say this as a very ardent feminist. I just found it like an interesting observation.
Mm. Yeah, very much so. So Victoria asked a question about whether the as you move down river and you were there with the YY who are indigenous protectors of the area, did their perspective on the area, did that change your understanding of it, and is that something that you brought back home with you in terms of taking some of their connection back to your daily life? Sorry, Victoria, I've probably mangled your question horrendously there.
No, definitely. It has changed the way I see things. And I think the other interesting thing was that, Ant, who was one of our guides on the river section, he had actually done some mining. So in terms of earning money, the YY community do guiding, some people do mining. And so there's a range of work that people either go to find or comes to them in the village. And he was saying to me that actually what he realized on this journey, having seen the progression from the source to the Atlantic Ocean, was that they really needed to keep the headwaters of the Essequibo clear of any sort of deforestation. And that I think actually, funny enough, I was putting together something on this earlier. So what did he say? I think the thing I don't think people understand is that the YY people are protecting the whole of Guyana. That was Ant's words. And I think he came away, and Ramel as well, from this journey going, wow, actually, what we're doing up at the source of the river is super important. And that seeing that kind of devastation and that change in the river really did shake them. But also, a lot of the YY, one of the other ways of earning money is to be a ranger. So is to go out and work for some of the charities in terms of the environment and like monitor what's going on in there in the region. So yeah, it's a very complex issue. It definitely made me consider the sources of what I'm consuming and why. And I think it was such a visceral experience. We'd gone from this pristine virgin jungle, we were washing in the water, we were drinking the water, to suddenly passing the gold mining areas and then getting sores on our body and no longer being able to drink the water. It was kind of that very physical reminder that we're going to get what we put out, aren't we? And actually even getting leishmaniasis, the flesh-eating parasite, the change in climate change means that more and more sandflies are kind of hitting European shores now. There were more sandbanks where I was on the Essequibo, so more sandflies. And it's very present in areas of like upheaval generally, whether that's, urbanization or whatever. So really interesting, just seeing up close and personal how the impact we're having will come back to bite us.
And it's I mean, I think you use the word visceral there, and I guess that's what it is on a trip like that. We've not really talked a great deal about the fact that you achieved a world first in your trip of tracing the furthest, the highest up source of the Essequibo. How does it feel to have been somewhere that no one else had been before?
Yeah, that was a special moment. So when we were going, sort of trying to find the source, and on this, I should say there are many different sources to the river, but essentially we asked the Wai, you look, where do you think the source of the river is? We're not cartographers here. We're not entirely sure. So it was very much guided by the Wai. And as we were going to near where they thought the source was, Jackson just turned to me and said, I don't think any foreigner has ever stood here. And when you consider 500 people have been in space and how few people have been in that environment, it was one of those moments where, you're surrounded by massive trees, the sunlight was coming through and it was sort of dappled on the ground, and it'd just been raining, and that smell of vegetation. And you just think, this is wild. This is like a wild place, and just what privilege. And also just how much there is to explore on our own planet when you consider the oceans and, really wild rainforests and things like that. There's so much we don't know. And especially when it comes to medicine and things like that from the jungle, it's a fascinating place. And it was, a really humbling experience. Definitely one of those take your breath away moments.
I can barely imagine. I mean, it's I think it's fabulous. As I was doing some research, I came across the tale of some explorers who, I think it was the 70s, who came down the Essequibo on a hovercraft. Did you know about that?
Is that Beranger? Is that the French guy?
I think so.
Yeah,
I was going to ask if you ever wished that you had a hovercraft.
Always. Who doesn't? No, there was definitely a team that went out from the Royal Geographical Society in I think it was 1969, to document the sources of the river. And I think they split up. There was two guys, and they kind of went off. And yeah, so again, it's one of these really frustrating things actually when it came to writing the book, because I was like, well, it's just a source, but actually the source of like the Amazon's contested, the source of the Nile's contested. So it is a source, but there are other sources as well. But we think this is the furthest source.
And so that puts you absolutely in the middle of nowhere, and you'd got there under your own steam, and then you got out under your own steam, and it was 3 months in total. That's pretty committed, isn't it? Did it ever scare you at any point, being so committed?
Yes, and I think it was one of those things. I, in my naivety, thought, oh, okay, I've done big journeys before. I'd done a documentary on deforestation in Brazil and Peru, and I'd spent time in that environment. But I think this was the first time I'd ever been so remote. And we'd done a wilderness medicine course before we set off, but I definitely realized when you're 3 weeks away from medical help, when you've seen the helicopter rescue team and they've said, look, we can't fly at night, we don't have a winch, and don't get into trouble after 3 p.m. or you're stuffed and you need to clear the area the size of a football field in order for us to land. Suddenly you're going, oh gosh, what seemed like a good idea when I sat at my desk at Red Bull in a post-lunch slump is actually very real now. And I write in the book about nearly sitting on a deadly snake, and the kind of emotional fallout from that, because I was like, there is literally no way out. I am completely at the mercy of the jungle here. I'm not entirely sure I'm fit enough. I'm not entirely sure I've got it in the head. And I can't get out. And that was a really scary moment for me, kind of thinking, why am I here again? Like, it's and that's when the ego kind of came into play. It's like, really, like, seriously, what insecurities in my life have led me to this point? But actually it was also, I think every bad experience, you can learn something from, in some senses. And that was when I kind of got to grips with the fact that you can't change your problems, but you can change your attitude. because there was no other way. I mean, what else was I going to do? Cry in the jungle and not move? So I think opening up to my teammates, telling people I was struggling, was really powerful. And then by the end of the trip, I absolutely loved being in that environment. And I think humans are resilient and humans are adaptable. And what kind of seems daunting and scary at first, you definitely become accustomed to over time.
There was a bit where you talked about just making a little bit of progress each day, and how you related that in the jungle and in your everyday life. Is that, I guess that's one of those techniques that is equally applicable, isn't it?
Absolutely, because I remember sort of sitting at my desk at Red Bull thinking, I want a bit more of a freelance lifestyle. I hate having to ask, can I go on holiday? Can I take a couple of days off? And I was like, well, how do I get there? And sometimes it feels like a massively overwhelming thing, doesn't it, making a change? So I'd be like, okay, well, maybe I'll fire off a tweet to someone, or maybe I'll arrange a coffee with someone. And I think it was those small kind of day to day little changes that actually added up over time and allowed me to think, okay, now I feel confident enough to leave my job, and I've got enough kind of in the background to kind of boost me. And in the jungle, a good day of movement when we were hacking our way with machetes through the jungle is 4 kilometers. So every single centimeter is painfully earned. And I think if you said in an entire day you're going to move 4K, that's pretty disheartening. But actually, if you think, well, I'm 4K further on than I was yesterday, and I'm 4K closer to where we need to be, that's really powerful. And, I think it's been said many times, but we overestimate what we can do in a year when we make our New Year's resolutions, but we underestimate what we can achieve in a decade when we kind of give ourselves a little bit of a rest and leeway to kind of make change.
What a fabulous way of looking at it, and it rings true as well because of that lived experience that you've had. So what's the bit that you look back with the most fondness on from the trip?
The friends that we made. And I think anyone who's done a journey with anyone, like, you see all sides of each other, you see the good and the bad, and it's a really bonding experience. And it's really lovely because I still get messages. Nigel's on Instagram and we WhatsApp every now and again, and likewise with James, his grandfather. We'll exchange messages, especially over COVID, sort of checking that everyone was okay. And yeah, it's really nice just when you get like a random voice note saying, hi, how's it going? So I definitely think it's the friendships, because we went through something together, and it was scary, it was amazing, and there was a sense of pride doing it. So and that was the other funny thing, actually, talking about connections, because what I didn't realize before I wrote this book, and anyone thinking of writing a non-fiction book, get permission from everyone that you're writing about if they're identifiable. So, even though I'd said every night, I'm just writing my diary for the book, blah, 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 everyone knew. It was very important to me that everyone was on board with what I'd written, and kind of approved the quotes that I'd attributed to them, and just checked it was all fine. But trying to get hold of people during COVID, when essentially the villagers had spread to their farms, which are like deep in the rainforest, to try and avoid spreading COVID. Just being like, by the way, could you just see if Nereus has approved this bit of text? And here's a PDF file sent through like Facebook. Can you just read the entire book and let me know if there are any problems? There was definitely a moment when the publisher was like, if we don't get permission soon, we're not going to be able to publish it on time. So yeah, a bit of a heart-stopping moment with that, but it was very important to get all the proper permissions.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially because of the way that you approached it. So I mean, we touched on a couple of those near-death experiences, and then there was one that crept up on you when you got back with the leishmaniasis. How did that feel, to realize that I guess you come home, you think you've left the trip behind, and then all of a sudden you find it's haunting you in a very strange sort of way.
Yeah, so I came back with this bite on my neck, which didn't really bother me because it wasn't hurting or itching, but it was getting deeper, and it was getting very pussy, and it was really smelly. And essentially I went to see the doctors at the Hospital for Tropical Diseases in London. They did this awful, like, let's watch and wait policy. I'm like, no, I want an answer right now. What is this hole on my neck? Essentially I was told, Google is never your friend, is it? And I've been Googling what it could be. Never thought it would be the thing that happened to me. So when the doctor told me that I had leishmaniasis, and that if I didn't have a form of outdated chemotherapy, the dates from the 1940s, to kill it, you can never kill it, but suppress it, it might eat my face. That's a pretty hard thing to get your head around. And then when you realize, actually, wow, again, this is just another example of privilege, that I have the choice to go to the jungle, to do these incredible adventures, to come back and get treated for free very quickly by world experts. Meanwhile, Faye, one of the ladies we met on the journey, is burning herself with cow fat to, like, sear out the parasite. And for me, that was absolutely mind blowing, to be honest, because I'm like, we live in the 21st century, and the choices are outdated chemotherapy that might pack up your heart and your liver, or burning yourself with cow fat. Which might work, and this is part of the issue. These local treatments might work, but they haven't had enough research in. And yeah, it's sort of sparked this path for me of, like, trying to raise awareness of neglected diseases, because I'm like, this isn't a little problem. Second biggest parasitic killer after malaria, but the people who get it are poor and live in remote areas. So literally no capital incentive to do much about it. So it's funny, again, it's one of those things that, do I wish it happened to me? Absolutely not. But what can I do with it now? Like, where can I go with this now? Because, like many things in life, I think at the time I was like, oh yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I'll deal with it. But actually, I've since been having therapy and stuff to try and get my head around some of the things that happen in the jungle, because you can so easily just smile and laugh it off. But actually, it's pretty serious, and it's pretty scary. And so yes, it's sparked a whole new wave of learning for me, I guess, the leishmaniasis.
And so is it becoming even more prevalent then? Is climate change making it worse?
Yes, exactly. So the movement of sandflies, because of climate change, hotter areas, huge movements of people. So displacement, anything like that, definitely can kind of cause more. So yeah, it's going to become an issue that the global north will have to face. It's already in, like, the Med, Ibiza, but it's been one of those places that, because it hasn't affected the global north so far, it's not really an issue. And I think most people I know who have ever had it are either very adventurous travelers or in the army. And again, that's another interesting thing, because most of the drug testing has been done on men. And so when I was, this is before I had my baby, going for treatment, I'm like, should I freeze my eggs? What should I do here? Is this going to affect my fertility? What's the long-term implications of this? And there weren't actually that many answers. So it was all quite tricky, and definitely more needs to be done.
Wow. Well, thank you for raising its profile, Pip, and thank you for writing the book. It was a fabulous book. I absolutely loved it, and I guess because you've set out to share some lessons, it really comes through so strongly that I've had this experience, and I want to share the benefit of that with everyone else. But it's not done in a look at me, aren't I great? It's more, I got leishmaniasis, so you didn't have to, sort of thing. But
classic tagline.
You can have that one. But you do so in a humble way, and you did check and reference your privilege all the way through it. And it's difficult, isn't it? We go out into the world, and we want to do the right thing for the right reasons, but because we're right thinking and reflect on these things, you do see the dark side as well, and you have to work that through for yourself. And it strikes me very much that's what you've done here, and I'm guessing that's what that sort of flavor is going to continue with your adventures and your sharing of them, whether it's written or poetry or presenting or whatever.
Oh, well, I hope so, Tim. Thank you. I'd love to try, and my next challenge really is to write more for kids as well, to sort of inspire them about the great outdoors and nature.
Fab. Well, I mean, you know, we've got to start them young. This time last year, I interviewed Lucy Jones, who wrote Losing Eden, and we finished the conversation with, I asked her what gives her hope, and the thing that she said was young people and the growth in outdoor education and forest schools, and I think it's so powerful, and I do think there's so much to benefit from being more connected with the natural world, and the sooner we start that, the better. So all power to you. Thank you very much. Well, and thank you for your conversation this evening. It's been absolutely wonderful. I know the pair of us have properly chewed each other's ears off. And thank you everyone who asked your questions. If you didn't get a chance to ask your questions, sorry, we were just waffling. We were on a roll. So yeah, Martin said he's really appreciated the honesty in the book and this evening, and loved your writing style.
Oh, thank you.
Right, brilliant. Thank you, Pip. I wrote to everyone and said we were going to try, and if you've had March's book, you'll know I wasn't sure whether I could secure the author because they are writing another book. I couldn't secure the author, so in March we're going to be talking with the author of our deep read, Annabelle, who wrote Windswept, which is about great women in the outdoors, forgotten women in the outdoors. But everyone's going to be invited. It's not just people who get the deep reads. So that's going to be on what day is it? It's going to be in April, and I think it's Monday the 11th. I'll confirm it via email, but everyone's going to get an invite. Brill, right. That's it. Thank you so much, Pip. Thank you everyone for joining us. It's been a pleasure. We'll do it all again soon. And Pip, you're always welcome back. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we'll talk again.
Thank you. I'd love to hear about everyone's books ideas, because the ones that I saw sounded great. Good luck.
There you go. You've got Pip's permission. You can email her for tips on writing your book.
Happy to help.
Brilliant. Right. I'll take us both off pin. We can all wave bye-bye, and then that's right. See you all later. I need to remove my pin. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.